towards the surface. All right, so now when we look at this, this is our gray matter that we're seeing, is dark purple. The gray matter is broken into regions called horns. What is gray matter made of? Yeah, neuron cell bodies, primarily. You could throw in unmyelinated axons if you want, but mostly it's neuron cell bodies. So when we look at the horns here, you're going to need to differentiate the anterior from the posterior. And of course, by looking at it, you can easily see that the anterior, even though it's large, but it's more blunt and rounded at the end. Compare that to our posterior, which typically comes more to a point. That's one of the key visual features that you're going to be looking for to differentiate the dorsal from the ventral side. Now, this is the dorsal horn, the dorsal gray horn right here. What specifically would you find inside of that dorsal gray horn? What is it made up of? What structures make up the dorsal gray horn? More specific than just cell bodies. What type of cell body? What type of neurons are there? They're sensory. Posterior, dorsal side, the dorsal gray horn is carrying the sensory cell bodies. Okay, so sensory cell bodies. Now on the ventral side, these are carrying, the structures you find in here are going to be your motor cell bodies. So the cell bodies of our motor neurons would be collecting in these these ventral gray horns. You'll also find, and this one's not the best in the world, but you'll notice this little swelling on the side. If you look at a good thoracic section, the swelling will be a little bit bigger. It'll be a little bit more pronounced. We'll also identify lateral gray horns. Lateral gray horns are carrying cell bodies of our autonomic neurons. So they're also motor, but more specifically for our autonomic motor neurons. In the middle of our gray matter, we have an opening. Anyone tell me what that is? Yeah, central canal. Passing through there would be cerebrospinal fluid. And the tissue around the central canal, all this gray matter around the central canal, mostly transverse neurons and some cell bodies, this structure is called the gray commissure. So identify all these parts to our gray matter within our spinal cord. Outside of the spinal cord, we're going to be identifying a network of columns, also known as funiculi. So on the front, this would be our anterior columns, or anterior funiculi. On the back, posterior columns, or posterior funiculi. So then, on the side, what are these called? Yeah, lateral columns, lateral funiculi. Okay, so that's pretty much it. All right, well, what would we find within the white matter? Myelinated axons. On the anterior side, mostly motor myelinated axons. On the dorsal side, or the posterior side, mostly sensory myelinated axons. And then on the lateral side, we'll see a mixture of both. That gets us back to our diagram on 469. That diagram right there. This is not all of the network of tracts. These are just some of the major networks, major tracts, major groups that I want you to identify. And you see that, yeah, in the front, mostly they're going to be motor tracts. On the back, mostly sensory. And on the lateral, a little bit of both. And so you should be able to identify those specific tracts, networks, those groups from the handout I gave you and link it to figure 1230. Okay, so go through lab 3, identify the parts of the spinal cord. You should be able to identify all the parts, including the meninges and the spaces on the models. And then just those few parts, those 9 parts on the slide.